AITA for telling my grandmother the truth about why my mother hasn't visited her in 3 years, after my grandmother assumed it was my fault. My grandmother is 84 years old. She has not seen my mother in 3 years, and she believes the reason is that I had an argument with my mother that damaged the family relationship. She told me this at her birthday dinner last month in front of 6 family members. She was wrong about the reason. The reason is that my mother has been in a residential facility for alcohol addiction for most of those 3 years, and my mother had asked me specifically not to tell my grandmother. I told my grandmother, I need to start by telling you about my grandmother's assumption, because the assumption itself is the thing that made this decision unavoidable. My grandmother, Nana Rose, is 84 years old. She is sharp and present and deeply involved in the emotional architecture of our family. She is also someone who has, throughout her life, managed conflict by finding an accountable party and assigning the narrative accordingly. She is not malicious in this. She is a product of a generation and a family culture where things needed to make sense and someone needed to be responsible. My mother's drinking had been a problem for most of my adult life. It was not something we discussed openly, not in my grandmother's presence, because my mother had always managed her behavior around her own mother with a care that was, in retrospect, very practiced. 3 years ago, my mother entered a residential facility for the first time. It was not her first attempt at sobriety, but it was the most serious intervention. She asked me, very clearly, not to tell my grandmother. She said she was ashamed. She said she would tell her herself when she was ready. She said she needed me to cover for the absence in the meantime. I covered. I made vague references to my mother being busy, to having a lot on, to distance being difficult. I did not lie directly, but I obscured the truth. At my grandmother's birthday dinner last month, in front of my uncle, 2 cousins, their partners, and my grandmother's neighbor, Nana Rose looked at me and said, I know there was some trouble between you and your mother. I want you to know I think you need to find a way to fix it. She is my daughter and she misses you both. She believed the absence was my fault. She had constructed a story in which I was the reason her daughter had not visited in 3 years. I looked at my grandmother. I looked around the table. I said, Nana, that's not what's been happening. Can we talk privately? We went into the kitchen. I told her the truth. Am I the asshole for breaking my mother's confidence? Update, 3 months later. My grandmother handled it with more grace than I deserved, given that I had been obscuring the truth from her for 3 years. She cried. She said she wished she had known. She said she had been calling my mother and leaving messages my mother had not returned, and she had blamed herself, had been wondering what she had done wrong. She had been blaming herself. For 3 years, my 84-year-old grandmother had been wondering what she had done to make her daughter stop calling. I called my mother that evening. I told her what had happened. I told her what I had told Nana Rose. I told her that Nana had been blaming herself. My mother was quiet for a long time. Then she said she was going to call her mother. She called. I do not know the full content of that conversation. What I know is that they spoke for over an hour and that my mother has now visited my grandmother twice in the 2 months since. The visits are not simple. My mother is still in recovery, and the visits require navigation. But they are happening. My mother has not told me she forgives me for breaking her confidence. She has not said she is angry about it either. We exist, at the moment, in a careful and somewhat fragile understanding of each other that I am treating gently. My grandmother called me the week after the first visit. She said, "Thank you for telling me. I would rather have known than spent another year wondering what I did wrong." NTA or ITA, was her grandmother's suffering worth breaking the confidence? Comment below.